Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to immerse ourselves in this rich body of wisdom that is Torah, which we both receive, add to, and pass on. We are in the concluding portion in the book of Exodus, Parshat Pekudei. So we will read through the English translation of our portion. I'll share with you a focus study about it, and then we'll have our collaborative conversation about it. And if you'd like to unmute at this time, together we have this opportunity to say a blessing, giving thanks for this moment. Baruch
Baruch
atah
atah Adonai
Eloheinu
Eloheinu
melech
melech
haolam
haolam
asher
asher
kitanu
kitanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu
v'tzivanu la'asot
la'asot
b'divrei
b'divrei
Torah.
Torah.
Thank you,
Amen.
God, for this opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. I'll share with you the opening verses of our portion, which begins at chapter 38, verse 21, and then I'll offer others an opportunity to read as well. These are the records of the tabernacle of the pact, which were drawn up at Moses' bidding, the work of the Levites under the direction of Ithamar, son of Aaron the priest. Now Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, had made all that God had commanded Moses. At his side was Oholiab, son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, carver and designer and embroiderer in blue, purple, and crimson yarns and in fine linen. Richard, would you like to read starting at verse 24?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. All the gold that was used for the work, in all the work of the sanctuary, the wave offering of gold, came to 29 talents and 730 shekels by the sanctuary weight. The silver of those of the community who were recorded came to 100 talents and 1,775 shekels by the sanctuary weight. A half shekel a head, half a shekel by the sanctuary weight for each one who was entered into the records from the age of 20 years up, 630,550 men. 100 talents of silver were for casting the sockets of the sanctuary and the sockets for the curtain, 100 sockets to the 100 talents, to a talent a socket. And of the 1,775 shekels, he made hooks for the posts, overlay for the tops, and hands around them. The copper for the wave offering came to 70 talents and 2,400 shekels. Of it, he made the sockets for the entrance to the tent of meeting, the copper altar and its copper grating, and all the utensils of the altar, the sockets of the enclosure round about, and the sockets of the gate of the enclosure, and all the pegs of the tabernacle, and all the pegs of the enclosure around about.
Thank you. June, would you like to read at the very beginning of chapter 39, starting there?
Thank you, Rabbi. Of the blue, purple, and crimson yarns, they also made the service vestments for officiating in the sanctuary. They made Aaron's sacral vestments as the Lord had commanded Moses. The ephod was made of gold, blue, purple, and crimson yarns and fine twisted linen. They hammered out sheets of gold and cut threads to be worked into designs among the blue, the purple, and the crimson yarns and the fine linen. They made for it attaching shoulder pieces. They were attached at its two ends. The decorated band that was upon it was made like it, of one piece with it, of gold, blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and fine twisted linen, as the Lord had commanded Moses.
Thank you, June. Let me invite Mark Levinstein, if you'd like to read starting at verse 6.
Thank you, Rabbi. They bordered the lazuli stones with frames of gold, engraved with seal engravings of the names of the sons of Israel. They were set on the shoulder pieces of the ephod, as stones of remembrance for the Israelites, as the Lord had commanded Moses. The breastpiece was made in the style of the ephod, of gold, blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and fine twisted linen. It was square, They made the breastpiece doubled, a span in length and a span in width, doubled. They set in it 4 rows of stones. The first row was a row of carnelian, chrysolite, and emerald. The second row, a turquoise, a sapphire, and an amethyst. The third row, a jacinth, an agate, and a crystal. And the fourth row, a beryl, a lapis lazuli, and a jasper. They were encircled in their mountings with frames of gold. The stones corresponded in number to the names of the sons of Israel, 12, corresponding to their names, engraved like seals, each with its name for the 12 tribes.
Thank you. Robert, would you like to continue at verse 15?
Yes, thank you. And they made upon the breastplate chains at the ends of wreathen work of pure gold. And they made 2 ouches of gold and 2 gold rings, and put the 2 rings in the 2 ends of the breastplate. And they put the 2 wreathen chains of gold and the 2 rings on the ends of the breastplate. And the 2 ends of the 2 wreathen chains they fastened in 2 ouches, and put them on the shoulder pieces of the ephod before it. And they made 2 rings of gold, and put them on the 2 ends of the breastplate, upon the border of it, which was on the side of the ephod inward. And they made 2 other golden rings, and put them on the 2 sides of the ephod underneath, toward the fore part of it, over against the other coupling thereof, above the curious girdle of the ephod. And they did bind the breastplate by his rings unto the rings of the ephod with a lace of blue, that it might be above the curious girdle of the ephod, and that the breastplate might not be loosened from the ephod, as the Lord commanded Moses.
Thank you, Robert. Let me invite Jim, if you'd like to read a little bit, starting at verse 22.
Thank you, Rabbi. The robe for the ephod was made of woven work of pure blue. The opening of the robe in the middle of it was like the opening of a coat of mail, with a binding around the opening, so that it would not tear. On the hem of the robe, they made pomegranates of blue, purple, and crimson yarns twisted. They also made bells of pure gold and attached the bells between the pomegranates, all around the hem of the robe between the pomegranates. A bell and a pomegranate, a bell and a pomegranate, all around the hem of the robe for officiating in, as Adonai had commanded Moses. They made the tunics of fine linen of woven work for Aaron and his sons, and the headdress of fine linen, and the decorated turbans of fine linen, and the linen breeches of fine twisted linen, and sashes of fine twisted linen, blue, purple, and crimson yarns, done in embroidery, as God had commanded Moses. They made the frontlet for the holy diadem of pure gold, and incised upon it the seal inscription, Holy to the Lord. They attached it to a cord of blue and fixed it upon the headdress above, as God had commanded Moses.
Thank you, Jim. Catherine, would you like to continue there at verse 32?
Thank you, Rabbi. Thus was completed all the work of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting. The Israelites did so just as Adonai had commanded Moses, so they did. Then they brought the tabernacle to Moses with the tent and all its furnishings, its claps, its planks, its poles, its posts, and its sockets, the covering of tanned ram skins, the covering of dolphin skins, and the curtain for the screen, the ark of the pact and its poles, and the cover, the table and all its utensils, and the bread of display, the pure lampstand, its lamps in due order, and all its fittings, and the oil for lighting, the altar of gold, the oil for anointing, the aromatic incense, and the screen for the entrance of the tent, the copper altar with its copper grating, its poles and all its utensils and its sockets, the screen for the gate of the enclosure, its cords and its pegs, all the furnishings for the service of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, the service vestments for officiating in the sanctuary, the sacred vestments of Aaron the priest, and the vestments of his sons for priestly service. Just as Adonai had commanded Moses, so the Israelites had done all the work. And when Moses saw that they had performed all the tasks as Adonai had commanded, so they had done, Moses blessed them.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, Linda. Welcome. So, Justin and Linda, would you like to read a little bit at the very start of chapter 40?
Thank you. Thank you. Would you like to start?
Sure. Okay. Sorry I'm late, Rabbi. I got a phone call. Sorry.
Lovely, lovely to have you with us.
Thank you. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, on the day of the first month, on the first of the month, you shall set up the Mishkan of the tent of meeting. There you shall place the ark of the testimony, and you shall spread the dividing curtain toward the ark. You shall bring in the table and set its arrangement. You shall bring in the menorah and kindle its lamps. You shall place the golden altar for incense before the ark of the testimony, and you shall place the screen of the entrance to the Mishkan. You shall place the altar of the burnt offering in front of the entrance of the Mishkan of the tent of meeting. You shall place the washstand between the tent of meeting and the altar, and there you shall put water. And you shall set up the courtyard all around, and you shall put up the screen for the gate to the courtyard. You shall take the anointing oil and anoint the Mishkan and everything within it, and you shall sanctify it and all its furnishings. Thus it will become a holy thing.
You shall anoint the altar for the burnt offering and all its implements. You shall sanctify the altar. Thus the altar will become a holy of holies. You shall anoint the washstand and its base and sanctify it. And you shall bring Aaron and his sons near the entrance of the tent of meeting, and you shall bathe them in water. And you shall clothe Aaron with the holy garments, and you shall anoint him and sanctify him, so that he may serve me as a Kohen. And you shall bring his sons near and clothe them with tunics, and you shall anoint them as you have anointed their father, so that they may serve me as Kohanim. And this shall be so that their anointment shall remain for them an everlasting Gehuna throughout their generations. Thus Moses did, according to all that the Lord had commanded him. So he did.
Well, thank you so much, both of you. Norm, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 17?
Sure. In the first month of the second year, on the first of the month, the tabernacle was set up. Moses set up the tabernacle, placing its sockets, setting up its planks, inserting its bars, and erecting its posts. He spread the tent over the tabernacle, placing the covering of the tent on top of it, just as Adonai had commanded Moses. He took the pact and placed it in the ark. He fixed the poles to the ark. He placed the cover on top of the ark and brought the ark inside the tabernacle. Then he put up the curtains for screening and screened off the ark of the pact, just as Adonai had commanded Moses. He placed a table in the tent of meeting outside the curtain on the north side of the tabernacle. Upon it, he laid out the setting of bread before Adonai, as Adonai had commanded Moses. He placed the lampstand in the tent of meeting opposite the table on the south side of the tabernacle. He lit the lamps before Adonai, as Adonai had commanded Moses. He placed the altar of gold in the tent of meeting before the curtain. On it, he burned aromatic incense, as Adonai had commanded Moses.
Thank you, Norm. And Deborah, would you like to read starting at verse 28?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Then he put up the screen for the entrance of the tabernacle. At the entrance of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting, he placed the altar of burnt offering. On it, he offered up the burnt offering and the grain offering as Adonai had commanded Moses. From it, Moses and Aaron and his sons would wash their hands and feet. They washed when they entered the tent of meeting and when they approached the altar, as Adonai had commanded Moses. And he set up the enclosure around the tabernacle and the altar and put up the screen for the gate of the enclosure. When Moshe had finished the work, the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the presence of Adonai filled the tabernacle. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled upon it, and the presence of Adonai filled the tabernacle. When the cloud lifted from the tabernacle, the Israelites would set out on their various journeys. But if the cloud did not lift, they would not set out until such time as it did lift. For over the tabernacle, a cloud of Adonai rested by day, and fire would appear in it by night, in the view of all the house of Israel throughout their journeys.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. That is both our Torah portion for the week, and it also concludes the book of Exodus. And with the conclusion of a book of Torah, we have a special recitation that we say, and together we can recite it, which is
Hazak, Hazak,
V'nit
Vinit Hazek.
Hazek. Be
Be
strong,
strong, be strong.
and we
May
shall
we
be
be
strengthened.
strengthened. Amen.
Thank you. I'd like to share with you a focus study about our portion prior to having our collective collaborative conversation about it. If you have a copy of the study sheet, I invite you to take it out. And oftentimes, when looking at a way to get into the Torah portion to provide some kind of focused study about it, I often go to the opening of a portion because I find there just some kind of initial kind of keyword or initial insight or initial theme. This time, I thought, well, since this is the end of a book, maybe the end of the Torah portion will provide us with that kind of key word or key lesson. So that's where I went this year to draw some kind of lesson and focus for us to spend a little bit of time on. And so here on our study sheet, I have the verses 33 through 34 from the concluding chapter of 40. When Moses had finished the work, the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the presence of God filled the Mishkan. So these are the verses that Deborah just beautifully read to us. And I want to spend a little bit of time with trying to understand what can we glean from these verses towards the very end of this book of Exodus. And I was thinking, imagine that the Israelites are assembled, listening and engaged in this work and the fruition of this major construction project they've been involved in creating the Mishkan. And the Torah itself devotes so much of its text to the construction of the Mishkan. In total, it's 13 chapters in Torah that has to do with the building of this Mishkan. So it's an enormous project. It's an enormous moment. It's a sense of fruition. And as we're going to see, the Israelites are about to leave this realm called Exodus, which has been full of this dramatic narrative that they have been not only has been told to them, but they're living through this. And there have been these miracles and wonders and the rescue from slavery in Egypt. And so it's a stunning, 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 dramatic story. And they're about to leave that realm of drama, and they're about to enter into a very different dimension. And that's the dimension of Leviticus, which is virtually bereft of narrative. It has virtually no storyline to it. There's no real narrative drama to it. It's going to be a recitation of protocols having to do with the offering up of sacrificial offerings and how the priests are supposed to preside over them. So it's going to be a very different voice. It's going to be a very different world for the Israelites and a very different world for us. So I'm trying to understand how Torah is creating a moment of transition, both for us as the readers and perhaps participants in this journey, and how it's preparing the Israelites in this moment to make this transition. So to help us make some sense of it, I turned to some various midrash, the kind of stories that the early rabbis would tell to try and explicate or expound upon the written text and to perhaps fill in some empty spaces or add some nuance or add some clarity, or in some cases, perhaps add some unclarity as a way to help us further understand and become active participants in the understanding of the text. So number 2 is from Midrash Haggadah, which is about a late 13th century CE Midrash. And they are looking at this verse that we've just read from our portion. And the Midrash says, they arose early next morning and saw the pillar of cloud encompassing the Mishkan. Immediately they rejoiced with inordinate joy because of God's great love for Israel. That's why it says in Song of Songs, his shade I desired and sat in it, and his fruit was very sweet to my palate. And the word that's used for shade is sel. So we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at that Hebrew word sel. And then there is another midrash. This one is a earlier midrash. It's perhaps from somewhere in the 5th century CE, which is going to kind of expand upon what is it that provides this shade, this cell that provides fulfillment of desire, provides sweet fruit, and so forth. And so this midrash, this apple tree, all others flee from it because it has no shade, cell. So did all the nations flee from the Holy Blessed One at the giving of Torah. But I, in his shade, delighted and sat. So this is curious because this midrash, also looking at this verse from Song of Songs, which refers to a shade that is provided by some kind of tree that also has fruit on it. This midrash is saying, well, it doesn't really have shade. And it is the kind of tree that other tribes, other nations just have no interest in because it doesn't provide comfort from the burning sun. It doesn't provide a cooling shadow in which to rest. So, and yet it provides some kind of shade that is of a source of rest and nurturance and delight. So it seems as if from this midrash, we might understand that the shade that is being referred to in the Song of Songs verse, and of course the Song of Songs, is it's a love poem. One might even consider it an erotic poem that's full of lots of sensual imagery and intimacy and confessions of love. And so one might understand that the tree or the shade that is being talked about in Song of Songs is not something that is sensible. It's not something that's perhaps practical. It's not something that's material. And maybe that's why other cultures may disvalue it. What value is this? It's just about love. It's just about It's just about sensuality. What's that worth? So and yet there is something about this shade, this intangible, not practical, not material element that is a source of nurturance, a source of even delight. So we're going to explore that a little bit more. So we're going to just focusing a little bit more. If you turn over the study sheet at number 3, we're going to circle back to this word that gets used for shade in our verses. And here we have from an earlier portion in a book of Exodus, this verse about the chief architect of the Mishkan, a man named Bezalel. And it says there, God says, I have endowed Bezalel with a divine spirit of wisdom, ability, and knowledge of every craft. So Bezalel, the key root within his name is this same word that we've been dealing with about shade, tsel. And Betzalel can be understood as meaning in the shade of God. So Bezalel is someone who's within the shade of God, and from within that shade, he has absorbed what the text says is divine spirit of wisdom, ability, and knowledge of every craft in order to lead the actual construction and design and construction of the Mishkan. So Midrash will kind of help us dig deeper into, well, what exactly does that mean? Does that mean he learned how to use a T-square? Does that mean he learned how to hammer wooden pegs together? Does it mean he learned how to make dove joints? I mean, what exactly does that mean? And so the Midrash says, well, what it means is he learned the power of letters. He learned the power of letters and how to combine them into words and how to combine those words into relationships, just as God did in making creation. He learned how to use letters, the alphabet, and words into bringing life into this world and to creating a structure that would sustain life. So again, so this notion about shade we're seeing here in these verses and in this midrash is not just about a physical tree that has sufficient coverage to be able to provide physical protection for someone. It has to do with some kind of spiritual, divine endowment that allows us to find not only rest and comfort, but as the Song of Songs indicate, to derive from it pleasure and delight. And it has to do with intimacy and love. Okay. So we return now back again to our verse from Song of Songs. His shade, cell I desired and sat in it, and his fruit was sweet to my palate. So we have another midrash, uh, which is from Song of Songs, Rabbah, the midrash about Song of Songs. That's going to talk about that as well. His fruit was sweet to my palate. Said Rabbi Isaac, these were the 12 months the Israelites spent facing Mount Sinai, sweetening themselves to the words of Torah. For what is the meaning of his fruit was sweet to my palate? To my palate it was sweet, but to the palate of the nations it was bitter as gall. So this midrash about Song of Songs seems to be saying that the nearly 12 months that the Israelites spent at Mount Sinai was was in a sense, if you've ever been to, like, anyone ever been to Tuscany, and if you've been, I've never been there, but I've heard if you go to Tuscany, you can stay at a villa and you can take, while you're there and seeing all the beautiful countryside, you can take cooking classes. And while you're there, you can develop this unique palate for the cuisine that Tuscany has to offer. And so I'm looking at this and saying, well, maybe that's what's happening here at their time at Mount Sinai, that they're being drawn into the cuisine of Torah. They're being offered up a way of developing a taste for a very different kind of way of understanding themselves in the world than they have been used to for hundreds of years living in Egypt. So now we're back to combining this notion of developing this palate, this taste for the way of Torah, and this notion of the shade that they experience, because that's what this midrash is now taking us back to, is that verse about the shade and the fruit that was sweet to the palate. So now we have a fruit from a tree that's providing us with a different kind of cuisine, a different spiritual cuisine, perhaps, than we had been used to, and a different kind of shade, one that doesn't derive from the mere materiality that's available in the world, but one that comes from a sense of intimacy and compassion in a relationship of one who doesn't seek to have power over us, seeks to have a loving relationship with us. So now we return to our verse from this week's portion, number 5. When Moses has finished the work, the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the presence of God filled the Mishkan. So another midrash. This is a Baraita de Mechelet HaMishkan, a teaching about the making, the construction of the Mishkan. And we don't know exactly when this was composed. A broad period is given, sometime late antiquity, maybe up to even as recently as the Middle Ages, so somewhere between 500 and 1500 of the Common Era. So here's what this midrash says about the construction and this notion about the cloud. When the Israelites were camped, the pillar of cloud rose straight up and stretched out over the children of Judah like a sukkah. It covered the tent from inside and filled the Mishkan from outside. So when I came across that midrash, I had to hover over it like a cloud for a little bit, because the description of what this cloud is doing was kind of confusing and provoking to me. Because on the one hand, when one thinks about covering a tent, usually you think about something that's happening on the outside. But here it says it covered the tent from inside. And then it goes to mention it filled the Mishkan from outside. And usually when you use a term like filling, you think, well, that's something that's happening on the inside. But here the filling is happening from the outside, according to this midrash. So this is rather confusing and confounding and provocative. And you wonder, well, what's going on here? And to try and break through my attempt anyway, I don't know if you react the same way, but my attempt to try and make sense of this, I turned to Abraham Joshua Heschel, who kind of gives me a little bit of a loving warning, which is this. Well, meaning is given to those who are mystery minded, not to those who are literal minded. In other words, if you're trying to just rely solely on your rational cognitive capacity to understand what that midrash is saying, you'll never get it, and you'll be frustrated and maybe even get angry because it's not making any sense. And so he's encouraging us to exercise a different capacity that we as human beings have, which is the capacity of imagination dealing with mystery. Okay. So for that, I'd like to take a look at our painting. So our painting is by Belgian artist René Magritte. And René Magritte, although he was in many ways associated uh, with the surrealists in terms of what concepts he was interested in, namely exploring the subconscious, exploring what was strange and discordant in the world. He was not like them in many other ways. He was not like them in his own lifestyle. Many of the surrealists were proud of how outrageous they could be. And Magritte really pictured himself as just an ordinary 9 to 5 businessman. Uh, if you ever seen any of the clothing, for example, that Salvador Dali would wear, leopard print and all kinds of wild, flamboyant clothing, Rene Magritte dressed basically in a black suit, a white shirt, a tie, and a bowler hat. He looked like he was just a banker, you know, and also the actual his actual aesthetic, his methodology on the canvas was very different than many of the surrealist artists. Many of the surrealist artists had images that uh, we would never have seen with our eyes anywhere. They look like things that came out of dreams or sometimes nightmares, figures that were greatly distorted, sometimes forms that look more like amoebas than human or animal forms. And everything that's for the most part on Magritte's canvases, his canvases are very meticulous, very, very clear. Every object on the canvas is something that's familiar to us. It's recognizable. There's nothing strange about the objects that are on the canvas themselves. What he does is he puts them into relationships with one another or in contexts that strike us as like odd. And that's what becomes provocative. Okay. So here we have this canvas called The Human Condition. And what we have there is a room, and there is a window. There are drapes on either side of the window. In front of the window, there's an easel with a canvas on it. Outside the window is a landscape scene, and on the canvas is also a landscape scene. And as we look at it, we see, oh, there's some similarities between what's on the canvas and what lies outside the window. There's the blue sky, there's the clouds, there's a close by field of grass, there's a dirt roadway going through the grass, there are bushes in the mid distance, and in the far distance, we can see hills of trees and so forth. And so the canvas is blocking us from seeing the entirety of the outdoor landscape. And as we look at it, we might think, oh, okay. Well, the artist has been painting what he sees that's outside the window. And so what he sees uh, or she sees must be what else might be there, must be there behind the canvas is what he's completed on the canvas. That is that tree and the rest of the hills and the rest of the roadway and so forth. And what Magritte was fascinated by was how sometimes we can trick ourselves into thinking that we know what's before us, and that we always want to know, he said, what's everything he says, everything that we see hides something else. And we desperately want to get to see what is hidden from us, because perhaps that will tell us the purpose of our very existence. And so he's now playing with our desire, if you will, to make sense of the world, to try and create a continuity by by allowing us to immediately think that what's on the canvas is what's behind the canvas. and he's kind of, in a sense, playing with our desire to create that unbroken continuity. And he's offering us the possibility that, look, that's not necessarily what's there. In fact, going even deeper, what you're seeing in the window or beyond outside the window, that might not even be there. Just like there's something behind the canvas, there might be something behind what we see outside the window. So this notion about what is we think we're seeing and relying upon our literalism, if you will, to then superimpose on the canvas what literally is outside the window, and consequently what must be on also outside the window is what's on the canvas. He's kind of challenging us to say that might not be the case. And what you're seeing is merely what your mind is telling you is there, rather than what might really be there. And so he's offering us this opportunity to exercise our imagination. When I showed this painting to my granddaughter, I said, "So what do you see? What do you think is behind the canvas? What do you think is outside?" And she said, "Well, I think there's a circus and a Ferris wheel." And I was just stunned, that so quickly she allowed her imagination just to assert itself rather than the logical positivism to say no, what's on the canvas is really what's behind out there in the world. So here's taking us back to our Torah portion. These last few verses that Deborah read for us about the cloud and the Mishkan. This is the concluding lesson in the book of Exodus, both for us and for the Israelites. And we're about to enter into a book that many of us feel is like, why is it even here? Why are we reading the book of Leviticus about all these offerings and sacrifices and priests? It's not our world anymore. And so we're about to enter into also a book that has no story to it. We've had this wondrous stories in Genesis and Exodus and Leviticus. There's going to be one very short story. Otherwise, the rest of it is just a series of rules and protocols and procedures. Okay. So as we're about to leave behind this wondrous and in some ways miraculous world of Exodus, Torah might be wanting us to carry with us this lesson that we sometimes need to look beyond literal meanings in order to extract our lessons. That to enter into the Mishkan, to enter into the Sukkah, which is what our Midrash also mentions, to enter into the Mishkan, or to enter into the Sukkah, is to enter into more than a physical structure. It's to enter into an experience of mystery. And that mystery, as the Song of Songs hints at, is about intimacy. It's about love, and it's about devotion. And sometimes that's one of the most mysterious experiences we can ever have. And to try and make rational sense of it can lead to a great deal of frustration. So I'm reminded of that moment when Moses has this encounter with God after smashing the first set of tablets, and says to God, "Please, please, please, if you love me, let me see your face." And God says, "No, you can't see my face. no human being can see my face and continue to be alive. What you can do is see my back. And one of the great Hasidic rabbis, the Ishbitzer Rebbe, says, oh, what God was doing at that moment was giving Moses one of the greatest gifts. God was giving Moses the opportunity to use his own imagination about what that experience with the divine was like. So this is what I got of this week's portion, that both the Israelites, as they leave behind this moment of Exodus and enter into another dimension, and for those of us who have to deal with sometimes a harsh world, and we need to have a diet that consists of both the tangible and the intangible, the hidden and the revealed, the literal and the poetic, the obvious and the mysterious. Indeed, I think what the conclusion of our book of Exodus is offering to us is that we need to develop a taste for the imaginative. So with that, I'd love to know what you experienced, what you felt, what you treasured, what puzzled you in the reading of our portion this week. If you raise your hand, so I'd love to call upon you. Yeah, Norm, please.
Oh, I have to go first. I didn't bargain for that. So when I looked at this painting, my first reaction was there was something was strange yet drawing me in, like I couldn't quite get it, like there's something surreal about this. I know he's related to the surrealists, and I think it's a good description. And what's strange about this, the painting itself is kind of transparent. You have to kind of look for clues that it's really there. And what's in the painting, by my view, is exactly what's in back of the painting. So why would somebody be making a painting that's exactly what's in back of it? And yet when you look at reality for what really is, there's endless interest in it. But why would somebody make a painting of that? The reason that somebody would make a painting of what's exactly there is so that I can look at the painting that someone has made of something that's there and draw as much or as little interest of it as I can. What does that have to do with the Mishkan? You know, all these incredible appurtenances that are in the Mishkan, the colored yarns and the fabrics and the gold and the silver and the copper and the lampstand and the showbread and the table and the pomegranates, and oh my gosh, it just goes on and on. The breastplate and the ephod and it just goes on and on. And yet, if that's all that you're looking at, what do you have? You have a bunch of stuff. Um, so this painting and the Mishkan is not where it's at. It's a beginning. It's an entry. It's something that you have, that you exist in, that you look at, that you are in, so that you can take it from there and go to the next step. It's a beginning, and it's giving us the entrance to the beginning of the next book.
Lovely. Thank you. I'm gonna share a comment with you after we've gone through a few more thoughts, and then we'll come back. So, Catherine, would you please share with us?
Thank you, Rabbi. I gathered three themes from this parshat. One has to do with the inscription of names on sacred vestments, which will allow for acts of remembrance while worshiping, which I found really important And another is the idea of purification upon entry, so that this idea that you're not in the same space when you're inside the Mishkan as you are outside of it, that somehow you need to prepare yourself for entry. And the third is protection, that there's needs to be this kind of protection of that space. And I thought of it as not just meaning, of course, the protection against inclement weather or what have you, but rather this idea of holding something that transpires in the Mishkan inside so that we can experience it that more intensely. Because if there were no cover or no protection, then that experience might dissipate in some way. And from the painting, I gathered that one can find art in nature, but art is not reality because we see the edges of the easel and the overlap with the curtain and the top of the easel, which is sort of superimposed over the landscape. So I like that he opens up for us this idea of art flirting with reality, but not quite becoming it.
So a couple of quick things. One about what you're saying about art is not the same thing as reality. This is on the study sheet. I have this quote from Rene Magritte. Art evokes the mystery without which the world would not exist. So he's trying to get us to have a sense that, we deal with this physical world, but really, if it weren't for mystery, none of this would exist. And that may be one of the primary ingredients of what the world is, which is mystery. And then very quickly your notion about purification, the protocol. When I would go as in my pastoral capacity to visit someone in the hospital, I always wash my hands before I go into a room. And yes, of course, there's one kind of physical reason for that, of physical hygiene. But the other reason for doing it is to wash myself of wherever I've been emotionally and spiritually, so that I can be attentive in the presence of the person that I'm there for. And that got me to thinking about the Jewish ritual of washing hands before eating food. And that's not really for physical hygiene purposes. It's a spiritual ritual purpose, which is I think, it just occurs to me, it's to remind us that we eat not only as a physical act, and that we eat not just to feed ourselves physically, but when we're partaking of this food, we have the capacity to make it into a spiritual, religious act as well. So thanks very much for bringing all that material together. So let me call upon Robert, Mark, and Richard. So go ahead, Robert.
Thank you again for a lovely evening. I'm going to try and wrap this up in some kind of a sensible pattern of thought. I loved your comments because they triggered a lot of thoughts in my own mind. So we started out with the Genesis, creation, et cetera, et cetera. Then we moved forward into a period of slavery, Exodus. Again, I'm just hitting a few salient points. I leave the detail to you. And now at the end, they've been released from slavery. What is the symbolism of the cloud? I think it's been very well represented in your comments that you shared. But tranquility, so when it says, and God dwelt within them, what does that mean? Faith, belief, love, communion with one another, peace, detachment from that old world where they used to say, oh, why didn't we go back? We would have had something to eat, right? Now, I love the point you made about the bridge to Leviticus. I do remember there's 613 laws in the Torah. What is required for them at that time? This was to be obeyed. What is required for them to obey? The culmination of two books ends up in the pleasure of God. I'm just going to use my own words, descending upon them, covenant. They accept that. Now they're strong. They're rested. Now the next stage, they have belief. Now they're going to be tested. What does Baha'u'llah say? Do men think when they say we believe, they shall be let alone and not put to proof? So now in Leviticus, we have all these laws. And the beauty to my mind of Leviticus is now the Israelites, the spearhead of humanity at that time, is learning discipline. They're learning obedience. All these things strengthen us. So those are just a few thoughts that come to mind. And then you mentioned about the cover on the inside and I forgot what it was on the outside. But what came to my mind, cover on the inside is like a wrapping. So if I look at the symbolism, there's wrapping of the heart, the protection, of the heart. And what is the outside? It's the community life. So I want to thank you for your thoughts that triggered those in me.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rob. We're going to come back to the notion about the cloud that you talked about in just a moment, which is also going to connect with something that Norm brought up. So let me call upon first Mark and then Richard here.
Was Magritte a Talmudic scholar? Because in reference to your Barita, when I look at that image, it seems to me he's filling the inside from the outside in some ways. And without that interpretation, I would not necessarily have thought of it that way. But it fueled my imagination, so thank you for that.
Yeah.
The other thing is this portion reminds me of the importance of having a sacred space and a sacred time.
Yeah. Very nice. Very nice. And just one more word about Magritte. Magritte, unlike some of the other surrealists, didn't start out as a poet or a wild fringe painter. He was a commercial artist, which is why his image is so crisp and clear. And somehow he was able to that fusion of commercial artistic background with these provocative notions about what's real and what's not real is kind of fascinating. So I agree with you, Mark. It's like you look at this painting and you say, wow, it just seems pretty real to me. And then it's only when you think of it in the context of what his mind is doing that you realize how mysterious and complex and confounding it is. Let me call upon Richard, and I'm going to want to share something with you about the cloud and the mystery.
I have two little things. What I get out of this painting, it took me a while to figure out about this. I can't really see the canvas, but it says the human condition. So I think what Magritte is saying is, it is what it is. And that's the only thing you can say so many times to people, and it's a common phrase, and it means is there's nothing more to say. It is what it is, and that's something you and your imagination and your conscience have to drum up. But the main thing that came across to me about this cloud and God enclosed in the cloud, it says in the Zohar, of course, that God doesn't go anywhere where male and female are not together. So male and female are there together. And I had this image, you spoke many sessions ago about the Israelites marching for 40 years as this group. And you said it's not so much individuals, it's a consciousness. And what I have made myself a little drawing of a circle going in one direction, and inside is the collective unconscious. And in the shadow of our minds, in the unconscious and in the collective unconscious, that's what we are, and that's where God is. And that it made me feel that give me the idea or the imagination that so often we talk about God as something external. It's this object, it's this guy, it's the boss, whatever it is. And if we're good, he'll help us out. But what I see is that we bring God into the world by how we behave with one another in the group. And this group is going through on this journey all this time, and they've got their squabbles and this and that go on, and their worries, and their hassling Moses and so forth and so on. But in the collective unconscious, there is arising a greater unity. And that's what is shown finally when they rest and they put something down, and God is in there and comes out at night and fills up from inside. All of us are filled up from inside ourselves by God because of how we behave with one another. It's not because, this is my model, it's not because something outside that made the light is bringing us joy and doing something for us. No, we've taken the order to treat one another as ourself, because there's only one self involved, and that's all of us together. And I think that this is what this is telling us.
Oh, Richard, thank you so much. Thank you. And I'm going to bring it together um, by going back to the story that's about Moses asking God to to let him see God's face. And what you all got me to think about for the first time, I never thought about this, is if Moses had seen God's face, would God have been more or less real to him? What the Ishbitzer Rebbe may have been pointing out is God becomes more real to you when you imagine God than if you were to actually see a physical presence of God. So let me end this way by talking about notions about hidden and revealed. We think we know what something is that's hidden, and we think we know when something is revealed. So we look at Magritte's painting and we think we know what's being hidden, and we think we know what's being revealed there. And so here is the wonderful complexity and that the Hebrew language offers us to try and disabuse us of our sense of certainty about what's being hidden and what's being revealed. So the word olam, those who participate in Jewish prayer services and practice have heard the word olam because you hear it, we sing it, Adon olam asher mahala. Okay, so or those of us who are engaged in other kinds of Jewish practice are familiar with the term from tikkun olam, right? So Adon olam, master of the world, tikkun olam, repair the world. So olam often in our prayer and text gets translated as world. Here's what's interesting, is that the Hebrew word olam is based on the Hebrew verb alam, which means to conceal. So really, when one says Adon Olam, instead of translating as master of the world, you could translate it as master of the hidden. And oftentimes, when people engage in very personal prayer, that they're seeking something very deeply personal, they'll use the phrase Rabbono Shel Olam, Master of Olam. And some people might translate as Rabbono Shel Olam, Master of the world. But really, what the Hebrew is encouraging us to really imagine is that what we're saying is Rabbono Shel Olam means master of that which is hidden, master of mystery. And so when we're asking deeply personal prayer, Rabbono Shel Olam, what we might be saying is this: O master of mystery, I am stuck in a world aware primarily of what is apparent, what seems to be material. Share with me some of your sense of mystery and hiddenness, because that might be my sense of salvation, and that might be my sense of real revelation. To immerse in mystery, to immerse in what the sense of hiddenness might be what really revelation is all about. Not showing up with cue cards and neon signs that blast all these words about what we're to think and we're to believe. So to be drawn into the mystery might be what is really an experience of revelation, rather than to have that moment of things carved into tablets, for example. You know, that might be quite actually more mystifying uh, than than the the cloud itself. Okay, so to have a taste for the imaginative, what our tradition teaches us is, well, okay, there's another figure who had to flee Egypt, and that was Edmond Jabé. Edmond Jabé was a Jewish man who grew up in Cairo and had to flee Egypt in 1957 during the Suez Crisis. And he goes to live in France, and he writes a lot of books about his experience and his sense of what life is all about. And he wrote a marvelous book called The Book of Questions. And what he said, what he wrote in that is, some of you seek to live the answer. I seek to live the questions. So what he got out of his Jewish experience and upbringing is that we are alive to the extent that we continue to ask questions, and to the extent we shut out the questioning and the wonder and the mystery, and we live only with certainty and answers, that's a form of death. And so here I'm seeing at the conclusion of this book of liberation, which is what Exodus is all about, that it concludes with the only way to be truly liberated is to allow yourself to let go of your certainty, to let go of needing absolute answers for everything. And I know Torah says, I'm taking you into this next book called Leviticus, which seems to be just a series of clear directions and protocols, and there's no mystery and story here whatsoever. But I need you to take this lesson with you so that you can make sense of what otherwise looks quite boring. Okay. So I need you to have a taste for the imaginative. I need you to develop a sense of the cuisine that the cloud offers, a palate for that which is mysterious, because that is ultimately what will enable you to endure, survive, and innovate yourself and the world around you. God bless you. I'm so glad to be part of this wonderful, rich community that is full of wonder and love and intimacy and compassion and mystery And it's a delight to explore the hiddenness that each one of us carries with us. God bless you. I look forward to our next gathering. Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
So thoughtful. Thank
Right.
you very much.
Thank you.